Okay, hi everyone. This is lesson 2 of the Cadet workshop. And the cadet workshop is the workshop for pitching and submitting to agents and editors. I'm Lara Willard. I am an editor. I've been editing fiction since 2008 and comics since 2013. And I'm really excited to share this information with you. And I'll let you know, this is actually supposed to be exclusive for Story Cadet members only, but it is so important, and I really want you guys to join us for the live tweet movies. So I'm sharing it with you, my followers online and friends. And if you also are a subscriber to the Writer Reveille, my newsletter, then you will get the download link for this video. So be sure to subscribe to my newsletter. It is on larawillard.com, Larawillard.com. On the very bottom, click on Writer Reveille. Okay, so let's get started. I hope you guys have your snacks and are ready to go. I just finished eating a bunch of dinner myself. Okay. We are doing a screen share. Okay. All right, so here we go. This is lesson 2. If you have any questions, you can tweet me at StoryCadet. So StoryCadet. And if you have any questions, I will answer those at the end. You can also, I think, if you're watching on YouTube, ask questions there. That didn't really work out last time, but maybe it'll work out this time. All right, so here we go. This is lesson 2. Last lesson, we talked about the differences, the pros and cons between self-publishing and traditional publishing. So the reason that you really need to know age categories and genres is so that your marketing team will know which people to target. It's really all about marketing. It's not really about, I mean, it is about where it goes on the bookshelf, but since we have, you know, the Kindle and a lot of people read online or on apps, or they just find books on Goodreads, which can have unlimited shelves. It's still important because, yes, your book, if it's in a bookstore, will need to be shelved somewhere. And I know I've gone to a bookstore where I was looking for like The Magicians or Princess Bride, and I had no idea where to look for those books. So we are going to figure out which readers you're going to target today and where your book would exist on a shelf and how to present this to agents and publishers. Okay, so when you're thinking about age category, there are really 3 factors. You probably heard at least one of these, but it's really a combination of 3 factors, and those are the age of the protagonist, concerns arranged by age, which you might not be familiar with. That comes from a bunch of librarians and agents, so that's the real thing people don't really always think about when coming up with age category. And then there's content, which is like movie ratings. So let's start with age of protagonist. Okay, we are not going to talk about NA or new adult. So new adult is the age category for 18 to 25-year-olds. I consider NA as adult fiction with YA tendencies. So there are some publishers that are looking for new adult fiction, and there is some imprints. There are some imprints that will target new adult readers, but it's still kind of a romance subcategory. Like it's targeted to romance readers, and it has gone into other genres. Like I've seen some fantasies that are new adult, but for now you might want to just call your book new adult or adult. So middle grade protagonists are 8 to 13 years old, and they are concerned with their abilities. Young adult protagonists are 14 to 18 years old, and they are concerned with their identity. Adult protagonists are 18 and up, and they are concerned with purpose and priorities. Now, if you look at young readers, they will tend to read up. So if you have the middle grade kind of targets like 8 to 11 to 12-year-olds, sometimes even just 8 to 10-year-olds, but they read up. So they will read up to a teenage, like 13-year-old protagonist. And then young adult readers will read up to about age 18, and that would still be considered teen fiction. So I'm also talking for people who are writing scripts and comics here, but since these genres are really established in the novel world, we'll be talking about novels primarily, but you can apply it no matter what you write. And I got these from conferences I attended, from panels with editors and agents and librarians to, well, and I filled in the blanks because nobody really talked about what adults think about. But let's start with middle grade. So middle grade, they think about their abilities. So they ask, how do others act and how does the main character fit in? MC is main character. MG is middle grade. If you can not see the difference because of the font, I apologize. So middle grade also does not want to be perceived as babyish or unable. You'll see that theme kind of pop up, well, motif pop up in middle grade, especially when they are on the cusp of puberty and adulthood. You'll see them struggling with that, like older siblings might call the main character a baby, or the main character wants to be perceived as an adult but still have fun. And that brings me to the next point. They still want to have fun without a lot of effort. And I mean, if you look at middle grade kids, like 11 and 10-year-olds still have a ton of fun, and they can be really wacky and crazy. And once kids start to hit about 14, they start to lose that wackiness. Preteens think about what they can do now and what they will be able to do in the future. A middle grade voice uses more can, could, and will language than young adult or adult. And Kyra, one of my fellow editors, actually wrote a paper on this for her master's degree, and I will link to some of her findings in the YouTube info after I post this on YouTube. It's great. You can also just look for it. Okay, so young adult, they are concerned with their identity. So rather than how others act and how the main character fits in, this is more about who the character is, what kind of person the main character is. So what circles is he in and how is he perceived within each of those circles? I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, I totally acted different at school than I did at home. And I acted different depending on which circle of friends I was in. And all of those circles really affect and shape young adults' identity. A teenager might also wonder, how can he still have fun without wrecking relationships? So he'll think more about consequences, but he'll also worry about looking stupid or looking uncool. And then teens think about the physical world in a relational context. So a young adult voice talks more about body parts than middle grade or non-romance adult, because let's face it, romance in any genre is going to talk about body parts because they're sensualizing a physical body. But even young adult that isn't romance will talk more about the body. And a lot of times young adult is in first person, it's in I language, but that doesn't mean that there aren't young adult novels in third person. There are a lot, and that doesn't mean that middle grade and adult books aren't in first person, obviously. So adult, the purpose and priorities is what concerns the typical adult. So an adult might ask, what are her responsibilities? What is she doing with her life? The existential crises usually, I mean, I've had existential crises since I was like 6, but they are more common for adults who really want to know what they're doing with their lives. After they have kind of figured out who they are, they want to know what they're doing. They'll also prioritize. So they'll try and figure out what is important in their life. Is it romance? Is it finding someone they want to spend their life with? Is it job? Do they want to move forward in their career? Do they want to stop what they're doing and have kids? Do they want to have both? Also, adults are more likely to be nostalgic about their childhood, looking to the past to inform their future. So they might have more, I don't want to say flashbacks, but they might be more introspective about how they were as children and teenagers. They might also have more regret. An adult voice uses more would and should language than middle grade or young adult. So by looking at these concerns by age, you probably already know how old your protagonist is. And maybe from the last slide, you thought, well, maybe my protagonist is the wrong age for the audience that I want to target. But there is still a third factor. But these concerns are what the readers will be concerned with, and it's likely what your main character should be concerned with. So let's say your character is 14, but we're set in like, I don't know, 900 AD. Someone in 900 AD that is 14 is going to be acting like an adult. They're not going to be acting like a teenager. So that would probably be more of an adult book, depending. And this is the third factor, content. So here, I'm just going to ask you to think movie ratings, and I'm going to use the movie ratings used in the US, which are not great, but just to illustrate. So in middle grade fiction, violence and sex are off screen, and they happen between adults or teens. They do not involve children. Middle grade fiction also cannot pit children against adults at the climax. They need help. So when you're submitting your work, you're going to be coming across a lot of gatekeepers, and the first gatekeeper is going to be the agents who decide whether or not they want to represent you. The second gatekeeper is going to be the editor at a publishing house. And then the publishers are going to have tons of people that have to say yes to your book. But even when it gets out on the shelves, a librarian or parent might say, no, my kid cannot have this book. And they might challenge your book because it has too adult content for their point of view. So you might have an adult fighting the middle grade protagonist, but more likely they'll get help. The first book in Harry Potter, and well, the first like 3 or 4 books in Harry Potter are middle grade. And a lot of times in middle grade fiction, there will be the main character blacking out, so they don't really see something happening. Like Dumbledore actually comes to Harry Potter's rescue at the end of the Sorcerer's Stone / Philosopher's Stone, and he blacks out and he wakes up. He doesn't really see all of the aftermath. I mean, he still kind of like actually kills, Quirrell, Professor Quirrell. Like he sets his hands on him and he basically catches him on fire. So that is technically like a child killing an adult, which is pretty dark, but there is still the fade to black where he passes out. That's my bird clock, if you can hear that. Okay, so a couple mild curse words might be used. I know that I was like a policing goody two-shoes 9-year-old, and I read Bridge to Terabithia, and it had like maybe 2 curse words in it, and I just threw the book away because it was so inappropriate and I was very high and mighty. So don't write to kids like that. And you can write whatever you want. A lot of kids do curse in the middle grade ages, but also know that your work might be policed by goody two-shoes kids, like I was, by librarians, and by parents that would call your book to be challenged and get it taken out of libraries. Although, if you have a banned or challenged book, you actually get quite a bit of press, so maybe that's what you want to go for. I don't know. The main thing with middle grade is to keep things PG. So not G, which is general audiences, but PG, which is parental guidance. And we'll get into some movie examples in a minute to go over age categories. Like if you ever watch The Goonies as an adult, there's a lot of stuff in that movie that I don't remember as a kid. And that's rated PG, and rightly so. But Stand By Me is with about the same age protagonist, and that's rated R. So if you want to do a comparison between those two movies, you can kind of see the difference between an adult audience and a child audience in terms of content alone. Okay, young adult fiction can include sex, but tends to stick to make-out sessions. So a lot of young adult fiction, if it's for the older ages, will have sex scenes. And if they do, it tends to be fade to black, like the curtain closes and there aren't any gory details. But in older or edgy young adult fiction, they might press those boundaries. But if we're just trying to be safe here, we'll say young adult usually sticks to make out sessions. I don't know why I can't say that word today. Okay, young adult fiction can also have more intense conflict than middle grade, possibly including teens fighting with or being hurt by adults. So with young adult fiction, let's just take The Perks of Being a Wallflower. That has some really dark young adult and adult conflict, and that is kind of pushing the boundaries. I don't know. I would still consider that PG-13, but yeah, so that's the difference. I mean, if you're not going to have like sexual predators in a middle grade book. That's going to be, even if all of the kids are middle graders, if there's a sexual predator in the book, that's probably going to be targeted toward adult or possibly young adults. So R-rated fiction will be challenged and possibly banned, just kind of like the cases with the middle grade. PG-13 is usually safe. So if you just think about a bunch of movies between PG-13 and R in your genre, try and figure out where the content kind of crosses the line into the R territory. So, and remember, I mean, when in the US, R is 17 and up. So you might have teenagers having sex, but it'll be called rated R. This is just kind of to give you an idea of content and which category it falls into. Now, adult fiction may include graphic sex, violence, and language. Just because you're writing adult fiction, that doesn't mean you have to put those in. You might include, you know, bigger vocabulary or whatever. A lot of adults actually read young adult fiction because they don't want the fiction that they read to be filled with gratuitous sex or violence or language. So you can write clean adult fiction. That's totally a thing. But if you include a bunch of sex and violence and language, then it will most likely be put with the adult books. Okay, so we're going to talk about some book examples. Okay, I'm just going to read these really fast. So middle grade characters and a middle grade audience. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Wonder, A Wrinkle in Time, Ender's Game, Number the Stars, The Lightning Thief, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. So I'm trying to show a pretty good array of genres that I think a lot of you will be familiar with. A lot of those are fantasy, there's sci-fi there too, there's historical and contemporary. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret is not contemporary anymore, but it has been edited to be more contemporary. If you read it as a lady when you were in 5th grade, it has changed. I'll just say that much. Okay, young adult characters and audience. The Outsiders, The Hunger Games, Eleanor and Park, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, We Were Liars, The Fault in Our Stars, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. Okay, adult characters and audience. Gone Girl, The Things They Carried, Beautiful Ruins, Bridget Jones's Diary, and adult audience with young characters. So these are, I mean, kids can read these books, but they're going to be on the adult shelf. To Kill a Mockingbird, All the Light We Cannot See, The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Again, these are just examples, and they're pretty well-known books. So hopefully if you haven't read them, or if you have read them, you can make a note of books that you might want to read in the age category that you think that you're writing for. So with To Kill a Mockingbird, I mean, you're probably familiar with that one. It's about Scout, and I can't remember how old she is. Is she like 8 or something? So she's a middle grade age, but her dad is one of the main characters of the book, and he's a lawyer, and it is about adult content, but through the eyes of a child. So yes, it's for pretty much any audience, but it's most likely going to be targeted toward adult readers. And that's also because it's more of a literary and historical too. All the Light We Cannot See, that has characters that grow up, and that is marketed as just general fiction, which will go with adult fiction. That's the other thing. Like, there's usually sections for kid lit. So there will be a general fiction section and general, well, all of the genres will have their own section. And then there will be a section for young adult books, and they'll have all of their genres. And then there will be a section for children's books, and they'll have all of their genres. But if you write something more literary, then it's going to be probably shelved with the general fiction. And I'll get to what general fiction means in a minute. The Ocean at the End of the Lane, that uses brackets. So it starts off with the main character as an adult, and then he basically flashes back to the whole story while he's a child, and then it ends with him as an adult again. And that's one way that you can write a child protagonist but still market it to an adult. You just have those bookends with the adult character reflecting. And again, that's the nostalgia showing in the adult books. Okay, movie examples. This is the best. Okay, so, and I'm just going to preface. This is unedited, as you can tell. I'm going to preface this by saying we are going to pick a movie, probably one from each age category, and live tweet it on Twitter. So if you're part of the class, or even if you're not, just connect with me on Twitter. You can use hashtag StoryCadet. You can tweet StoryCadet, or you can even tweet one of my other Twitter accounts. They're all connected to StoryCadet though. So go to StoryCadet and tell me what movie you want to watch, and we'll figure out a date and we'll live tweet it together. Okay, so middle grade, Inside Out, the best Pixar movie ever made. And I just watched it last week, and so I can say it with full authority that, yeah, I think it's the best Pixar movie ever made. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Spirited Away, The Secret of Kells, the Peanuts movie, Coraline, and The Parent Trap. Okay, that's quite a variety of movies in my opinion, and only one of those is Disney, and it's Disney Pixar. So you can kind of decide just look up those movies and see if you want to watch them and see if one is similar. The idea is if you've written a fantasy and you're not sure if it's for young adult or adult, or if you're not sure if it's between middle grade or young adult, then the idea is that you will pick a movie from each of those categories in the same genre. So Inside Out, I would consider contemporary or literary. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. Movies don't really have to fit in the same genre categories as books do. Harry Potter, that is a fantasy. Spirited Away, that's fantasy. The Secret of Kells, that's a fantasy. The Peanuts movie, that is more of a like contemporary, or you could consider it historical, I guess. It's kind of like a timeless movie. Coraline is like a middle grade horror, I guess. It's a fantasy too. And The Parent Trap is more of a contemporary. For young adult characters and audiences, and I have the ratings there. So if you think that your book is more like clean or lighter than darker edge of the scale, then you can pick based on ratings. So The Breakfast Club is rated R, but it is young adult characters, and it's for a young adult audience. The Hunger Games, PG-13, Clueless, Back to the Future, 10 Things I Hate About You, Easy A, and Juno. So Easy A has, I mean, it's about sex, but it's PG-13. So you can compare that with like another comedy that is for teens. And that will just give you an idea of what sex can be written as for a PG-13 or a young adult audience. Juno obviously has a pregnant character. 10 Things I Hate About You, that is an adaptation of Shakespeare. Back to the Future is a fantasy. Clueless is a romance. Hunger Games is an adventure slash dystopian. Breakfast Club was a contemporary in the 80s and now is historical. Adult characters and audience. So Life is Beautiful, that is one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. And that is a comedy about the Holocaust, if you can believe it. It's not, I mean, it's like a dramedy. It can't be really funny because it's about the Holocaust, but if you haven't seen it, it's an Italian movie and it's gorgeous. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, that is PG, but it's really about adult concerns. It's about Walter Mitty not knowing what he's doing with his life and having an existential crisis and traveling the world and wanting to be in a relationship with a lady. And I love this movie. It came out at the same time as, like, I don't know, one of the Hobbit movies, like on Christmas Day. So no one ever watched it. It has Ben Stiller in it. And it was like his brainchild baby because he basically paid for the whole movie to be made. And nobody has ever even seen it. So you should watch it. It's really good. I would watch any of these movies and live tweet them, obviously. Gladiator is rated R for violence, and it has some dark themes. Amelie is rated R for sex, and American Hustle is rated R for a lot of things, but I really enjoyed that movie. Okay, so adult audience with young characters. You have Moonrise Kingdom. Okay, I basically just listed a lot of my favorite movies. I'm not going to lie, but these are movies that I think are really well written or are enduring or are really great for their target audience. Moonrise Kingdom has young characters, but it's really an adult movie. Not that it has anything really risque, but just it's a Wes Anderson movie and adults will just appreciate it more. And it's basically like an existential kind of movie, only with children. Stand By Me has, I mean, that could be considered a young adult movie because they are kind of talking about identity, but really it's for an adult audience, not like The Goonies is. Okay, moving on. Genres. So, do you have any questions? I don't think I've gotten any pop-ups yet. If you do have a question, be sure to send it to StoryCadet. Otherwise, I'm not on the other Twitter accounts right now, so send it there. Okay, so we're going to talk about the major genres. So there's romance, suspense, which is actually an umbrella term. So sometimes you'll see like mystery and suspense or mystery thriller or suspense/thriller. Well, suspense is the umbrella term, and the three categories underneath that are crime, mystery, and thriller. And I will get into that if you think that your book or manuscript or story is a suspense. I'll break these down. Speculative fiction is broken down into fantasy, science fiction, and horror, among other things, like dystopian is considered speculative fiction. And then general fiction, which I mentioned earlier, that is a combination of contemporary fiction, historical fiction, women's fiction, and like literary fiction. What about action adventure? So if you're writing comics, there's definitely still an action adventure genre, but when it comes to books, unless it fits under a romance or speculative genre, action books, which is a good main character physically fighting a bad antagonist, is more likely to be shelved with a thriller. And adventures, which is the main character going on a journey, are more likely to be shelved with general fiction. Of course, if it's like a journey that's a fantasy one, then it's going to be stuck under the speculative fiction. So action adventure really isn't considered a genre when it comes to books. You might see it in kids' libraries sometimes, but in the literary world, it's not really considered its own genre. Okay, many stories have a romantic element, but the story doesn't fit in the romance genre unless these 3 requirements are met. The core storyline needs to concern a relationship between the main character and his or her potential love interest. Each scene asks, will they or won't they end up together as a romantic pair? And at the end, they have their happily ever after. So if you have even just 2 of those things, it's not a romance. If there's no happily ever after, it might be considered women's fiction or general fiction, but it's not considered a romance. You can ask any of the romance representing agents, and they will say romance needs to have a happily ever after. If it doesn't have a happily ever after, it is not a romance. And you might have romantic elements, but a lot of stories have romantic elements in them. So if you're writing a query, I wouldn't even say it's a fantasy with romantic elements if it doesn't follow under those 3 requirements, because pretty much any story that you write for teens or adults is going to have some sort of romantic interest. So it really just goes without saying. The only reason you would say it's a romance is if it follows those 3. So you might have a fantasy romance, that is a romance set in a fantasy setting, or you might have a romantic fantasy, and that is a fantasy primarily with some romance. So if you're wondering if your book is a fantasy romance or a romantic fantasy, really it probably doesn't matter, but it's kind of like crayons. Whichever one is last is the most important thing, and the one before it describes it. So a fantasy romance is a romance with some fantasy elements. So it might be, my friend Jenna wrote a fantasy romance, and it is a romance set in a fantasy world, but it's primarily a romance. There's like not a lot of magic, and it's just in a world that isn't our own. So that's a fantasy romance. But if you have a romantic fantasy, that might be, I'm just coming up with this off the top of my head, so I don't know. Okay, if you have a romantic historical or a romantic epic, it would be like Braveheart. It has a lot of romance in it, but primarily it's an adventure. It's a sad adventure. I haven't even seen it in like 10 years. I don't know why I'm talking about Braveheart. I could be, just correct me. Whatever. Okay, suspense is a literary device. So it can be used in any genre. It can be used in romance. It can be used in horror, which I guess I didn't. Oh, I know why I didn't put the horror down there. Okay, you'll find out. Spoilers. The following terms are more specific when describing genre. So under the suspense umbrella, you have crime. That is the main character solving crimes, preventing crimes, or even committing crimes. If it has to do with crimes, it's a crime book or story. If it is a mystery, then the main character sets out to solve a question. So that might be a how, why, or who using logic or investigation. So it's sometimes referred to as a whodunit, but it could also be a why done it or a how done it. So if you know who killed the president and you know why, but you don't know how they pulled it off, that's a mystery, and you're still solving it. Okay, so there are different kinds of mysteries. The murder mystery is finding out who, and oh gosh, I just forgot. And the crime mystery is finding out how, basically. In Story by Robert McKee, he just described the difference between the 2 different kinds of mystery, but that is relating to movies, not books. So just call it mystery if the main character is trying to solve a question. It's a mystery. For thriller, the main character tries to prevent things from happening. So, okay, it could be a crime, but a thriller is really trying to prevent a huge, big thing from happening. Like the Born Identity movies and books. So he knows what's going to happen and he tries to prevent it from happening. And it might be like a huge act of terror, or it could be like just a small personal crime, like a burglary or something. For a psychological thriller, that has its own category. It'll still be probably shelved with the thrillers, but that is when the main character is trying to decipher what is real and the audience tries to decipher who is reliable. So 2 examples of psychological thrillers are The Girl on the Train and We Were Liars. So a psychological thriller, basically all of the thrill is going on in your brain. And in a thriller, all of the crazy stuff is usually happening all around the world, and there's a lot of running involved and shaky cam. For speculative fiction, it's any fiction which challenges the scope of the real world as we know it. So in fantasy, the not in our reality elements stem from magic or unknown forces. In science fiction, they stem from technology, and in horror, those unreal elements evoke a feeling of dread or terror. So, like The Exorcist, that would be a horror because the unreal or supernatural elements are making the reader or audience scared, terrified, or feeling dread that something imminent is going to happen and it's not going to be good. With science fiction, basically, if it has science in it or technology, it's science fiction. And if it doesn't, then it's fantasy. And yes, there are subcategories to all of those, but the umbrella term is speculative fiction, and those are the main categories. You can have a mixture of them, and that will come, those answers will be questioned in your assignment if you choose to accept it. General or mainstream fiction. General fiction is fiction that doesn't fit the tropes of genre fiction. So really you go back to all the genres, and if it's not fitting comfortably in one of those genres, like even the umbrella terms, then it's general or mainstream fiction. So even if you have a fantasy adventure with some thriller elements in it, then it's not going to be general fiction. General fiction is basically its own circle in the Venn diagram. It's separate. So contemporary fiction is contemporary fiction that takes place in a relatively present day. So I say it's contemporary fiction if it came after smartphones. I used to say after the internet, but the kids that were born when the internet was popular are now graduating high school and like college. So now it's smartphones, about 2009 and after. If it happened in around 2009, 2008, and hence, then call it contemporary fiction. But if it happened before the smartphone era, it's historical fiction. So Eleanor and Park was set in the 80s. That is historical fiction. Any fiction set in the 90s, that is historical fiction. And if that makes you feel old, it should. Readers expect the main character to interact with historical events or characters. So it's not enough to just throw research at a person and establish place, which you really need to do. You do need to establish a great sense of place and like instill all of those things. But you also need mostly, if you want your book or story or script to sell to an agent or to an editor, you're probably going to want those main characters to interact with historical events or characters. So you might write something about something really great that happened in Toledo in 1985, but who's going to read it? If you're a debut writer and no one's ever heard of you, why are they going to want to read about a story in Toledo in 1985? I mean, I know that's really sucks to put it like that, but if you are wanting to get this first thing sold and you want an audience for it, you're probably going to have a really great concept. And if your concept is that it was set in the 80s, that's not enough. So you might want to have your characters, I don't know what happened in 1985. You might want to have your characters bump into somebody, or Toledo was a really bad example because I don't really know anything about it. I'm sorry. Sorry if you're from Toledo. It's a really great sounding town. But like, I can't, like in the 90s or something, there was a movie that came out called Dick, and it was all about the Watergate issue. And these girls like worked with Richard Nixon. So you're going to need something interesting. And it doesn't mean that it has to be really well known. I mean, there's a ton of World War II novels out there. That's pretty overkill almost at this point, because you're competing with every best-selling author who's also written about World War II. So you could write something about a really cool historical time or historical person, but you're going to have to be able to sell it with a really high concept. So it better be some lady that beheaded a bunch of people, because that's going to get people to want to read it. But if it's just like some senator from 20 years ago who did his job like everybody else, nobody's going to want to read about that. If you're a debut author, you're going to have to establish yourself, and then you can sell that book because you'll already have fans that want to read your book. That was a huge tangent. Women's fiction is driven by a female character's emotional journey. A lot of people say women's fiction is written by women for women, but it's not really. Yes, it's targeted to a female audience, but it could be written by men, and the only reason that it is targeted to women is because it has to do with an emotional journey. That doesn't mean that men can't read women's fiction. If it's about an emotional journey or like a sexual awakening, then yeah, it's going to be women's fiction. A lot of times people don't like even categorize things as women's fiction anymore. Chick lit used to be really huge, and there are some like new books coming out to sort of revive that genre, but chick lit kind of fell by the wayside, which is sad because it is pretty great. If you're writing humorous fiction, it will probably be put with women's fiction right now. Okay, assignment. How old is your protagonist? What concerns your protagonist, and do her concerns match her age category? If you've been scribbling like mad, like your notes, I thank you for your diligence, and I will post these on YouTube afterward so you can see the slides again. So your scribbling was not in vain. You were paying attention, and I applaud you. But if you missed something, this will be on YouTube for about a week until I remove it for the StoryCadet subscribers and members. So you can write this down if you want, but it will also be available on YouTube. What concerns your protagonist? Do her concerns match her age category? If not, consider changing the age of your protagonist or changing your target audience. So it might be as simple as making your character younger or older, and everything else snaps into place. Otherwise, you might need to make big changes. So a lot of times you'll hear, well, this book sounds young adult, but you're actually writing to adults. Or this sounds adult, but you're actually writing to a middle grade audience. I do have a post on that. It could just be your voice. That's a pretty big change, though, if your voice is the problem. If you wrote a story and it sounds too young or too old, that's pretty much a complete rewrite. But if you can just change the age of your protagonist, you just change references to that age and make sure that the character is in the right place and doing appropriate things for that person's age, like not driving if they're 10. Is the content too mature for readers of the same age as your protagonist? And are you okay with having a banned or challenged book? A lot of Rainbow Rowell's books have been challenged. Eleanor and Park was challenged over here, actually, very in a town nearby me, and that's a long story. It was sad. I'm not okay with with censorship, but I am all for having parents sign permission slips. Once you've decided on an age category, which one of the example movies, watch one of the example movies given for that age category. So I also recommend looking movies up on commonsensemedia.org before viewing if you are sensitive or are watching it with somebody that might be sensitive to one of those elements. Like Amelie has sex in it, and it's rated R because it has sex in it. So if you go to commonsensemedia.org, it'll give you a play-by-play of what people might find offensive. If you can, watch a movie from each column. See if other students want to live tweet the movie with you or discuss with you afterward. I would really love to live tweet these movies in the next week or 2 or 3 leading up to page 70 pit, which is the first week of July. So you can do it without me, but you should really invite me because I love these movies. How does that movie fit in its age category based on main character age, questions, and content? The questions is just another word for those concerns. Like, what is the character and what is the reader asking about their lives? Okay, so before I get to the Q&A, and I'm still not seeing any questions, so if you have them, shoot them over. But if your genre is speculative fiction, read the Guide to Science Fiction and Fantasy Subgenres on laurawillard.com. You can search for that, or I will put the link on YouTube. It's also right there if you really want to copy it down. And if your genre is general or mainstream fiction, read literary, mainstream, commercial. What genre is this anyway? And that will tell you what the literary term and the commercial term mean. And if you don't read it, I'm just going to tell you right now, I highly recommend you not call your work literary or commercial because it could do more harm than good. And if you want to find out why, go read that post. After reading either post, ask any remaining age category or genre questions on the private site. That way I can get to everyone's questions. Okay, so the private site is only available to StoryCadet members. And you can register still. You'll be able to register basically through lesson 5 or beyond if you want. You just won't get as much out of it if you register after that. And it's on StoryCadet.com. Okay, I'm just going to move on really quick. And this is lesson 2. Now, this is the last one. I wasn't even going to make this a public video, and I am going to remove it after a week. But the first lesson, self-publishing or traditional, that is available on my YouTube site. You can search Verity Lane, or you're probably there now watching this. And lesson 8, calls and contracts, that's also going to be free to the public. That's going to be an interview with Jackie Lee Summers, author of Truest, which came out from Catherine Teagan Books, which is an imprint of Harper, in 2015. So if you have any questions about an agent getting a call or contracts or anything that happens after getting an agent, she is going to answer those questions for us. So, but she's really only going to answer questions for the StoryCadet students. So if you enroll in the class, then you get first dibs on asking her questions. It will still be public. So if we have time afterward, then I will open it up to everyone else. But if those students dominate, then you'll be SOL because they get priority because they're students. Okay, so lessons 3 and 4 is going to be about pitching your work. In lesson 3, we're going to talk about the genre, the worlds, the concept, and the theme of your work. And that's going to be fun. And that is, because this is a workshop, we're going to be sharing that with the class, and I will help to answer any of your questions in the private site. All of these lessons are going to be quite a bit shorter because most of this stuff is going to happen in the workshop. Lesson 4 is character, goal, obstacles, and stakes. And once you're done with lessons 3 and 4, you'll have everything that you need to know to be able to write your query letter or your pitch document or your back cover copy or your proposal. And that's lesson 5. So lesson 5 is writing the query letter or pitch letter or back cover copy or proposal. That lesson, if you just want that lesson, you can buy it a la carte on the StoryCadet website. And that is going to be an intense class. It's probably going to last at least an hour, possibly 2 hours, because we are going to be dissecting a bunch of query letters, and you will be writing your own query letter too. And then lesson 6 is choosing agents or presses to query, that is, or to pitch. That is going to be a shorter lesson, and that will also be moved over to the private website. Lesson 7 is basically me translating responses and rejections. So what do you do when you get a B, C response from an agent? How do you respond? How do you respond to their responses? What do their rejections mean? If they said something that was confusing, are you reading into it too much? What should you do after that? And then lesson 8, again, is going to be the calls and contracts. So that is all for today. Okay, unless you have any questions, let's check. Maybe. Oh, I'm on the wrong page. Because obviously I can't hear any of you since I'm the only one here on the Hangout. The wrong page. Oh no, shh, quiet. Okay, oh, we do have some questions. All right. No, there aren't questions. Hi, Adrian. How's it going? I don't know what you were commenting. That's super interesting to know, but I'm glad that it was interesting for you. And there is still adventure when you're talking about like comics, because I mean, it was founded on adventure. But a lot of comics are just going to be, especially in like bookstores, they're just going to be arranged by Marvel and DC and maybe IDW, maybe by series or by creator. So they are sometimes like separated by genre, but not usually. So yeah, okay, well, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and tweet StoryCadet. If you go to storycadet.com, you can look at the courses. This is the pitching and submitting course, and there are lots of different options. If you refer a friend, you both get 50% off, so it's a 2-for-1 deal. And you can also just get a query letter edit, but that doesn't get you the lesson 5, or you can buy the lesson 5 and a query letter edit if you don't want to be part of the workshop, which you should, because then you get feedback from other writers too, and you make friends. And writer friends are the best. Okay, well, I'm glad you popped in and stuck through it. So great week, and I will be back next Wednesday at 8, but I hope to see you on Twitter or YouTube saying what you want to live tweet, because movie night, yay. Okay, have a great week.